So thank you very much to the Sangha and the community here at Santi Forest Monastery inviting me to give this talk to you today. It's really wonderful to be here at Santi again. This has been my spiritual home many times over in different incarnations of my own life, this present life. I have come to Santi for over 20 years now. And every time I come, Santi is different. It's changed. When I first came here, this upstairs area was 2 rooms. There was a bathroom. I can remember having a hot shower once on a very cold day. And that hot shower to me was like bliss. I can still remember how incredibly pleasurable it was because I'd been staying in the forest and it was cold and conditions here were not easy at that time. I think I was staying in Tiger Cave, which was in use constantly at that time. And you'd wake up in the morning with a layer of sand from the sandstone ceiling covering you. And there's a lot of monks here at that time, and some nuns also, and many of those monks have now disrobed, and those nuns also. And so over the years I've seen a great deal of change here at Santi. I'm looking at this chanting book in front of me. I think this is like the 6th Chanting at Santi Monastery booklet I've seen over the years. There's been many people who have been in charge, who have now gone, I've known them all. And it's so interesting, that feeling of coming back to a place without having any responsibility for it, without being an owner. And so this was in many ways where I started my Theravada spiritual practice, my forest practice, a long, long time ago. And since that time, of course, I've been around. I've been to, even in the last year, I think I've stayed in about 30 different monasteries. And each of them has the one true way of doing things. Each of them has the one true style of chanting, the one true way of doing this thing, doing that thing, the right robe color, the right way to bow, the right way to ask forgiveness. And this has been incredibly confusing for me, and also very healthy. Confusing because you'd think after 2,500 years, the Buddhists would have got their act together and would have sorted some of these problems out. And indeed, over the years, of course, there have been many attempts for Buddhism, which is often called the most disorganized of the organized religions. There have been many attempts of people to standardize, to control, to make united all the different Buddhist temples and monasteries. And so we saw this, for example, in Thailand under King Mongkut, who standardized a lot of the texts that we still use today, which are commonly chanted in Thai monasteries. And there's also a similar movement in Sri Lanka, where some of the Theras got together and kind of created somewhat standardized Sri Lankan versions of things like the morning chanting, the evening chanting. And of course, these are different to the Thai chanting, and also different to the Cambodian chanting, and different to the chanting they do in India. And so on my travels, I've encountered all of these things, these different ways of doing things. And so, as I said, it's kind of confusing, on one hand, like why isn't there just one way of doing this? And at the same time, it's been actually very, very helpful to me, because it means that I've had to let go of this idea of the one true way, my way, which is what that one true way always is. So it's my way, or my teacher's way, or my monastery's way, or my tradition's way. And I've had to become much more flexible in my thinking about these things and understand that the form isn't so important. The intention behind it is important. So doing these things, such as doing the offering of the candles, here we have 3, in some places you only have 1. Sometimes there's dozens. Lighting of the candles and the bowing and the chanting, the asking forgiveness of the Buddha, Dhamma and Sangha, to understand the reason why we do these things. Why were they necessary? Why was it necessary to have a standard order of texts that we chant? And as I mentioned, these were written much later. These aren't Buddha Vachana, these things. They're written much, much later. And there must have been a reason for it. And I think one of the reasons is because that familiarity itself is a kind of ritual. That familiarity is a way for people to feel certainty in the world, to feel certainty, especially when it comes to their spiritual practice. You know when you turn up what you're going to do. You have a feeling of comfort and ease that comes from this repetition. You have a feeling of certainty, of knowledge, of ownership of that knowledge, that you have this cultural understanding and that this is the way things are done. And so that feeling, that certainty kind of overcomes the confusion that might creep in if things were different every time that we did something. Every time that we came upstairs to do chanting, Bhante Akaliko skips the important bits and just does his own version. And then there's some uncertainty. Wait, this isn't the right way to do this. This isn't how we should do this. And of course, this is pointing to a kind of bigger problem that we have as spiritual practitioners. And that is our incapacity to sit with unease, to sit with doubt, with discomfort, with, I'm going to say it, change. Because that's what it is. It's change. And when I come back to this monastery and I see so many changes, I'm just reminded of the incredibly powerful forces of change that we like to pretend don't exist. We talk about change as part of our spiritual practice, but when we're confronted with it, it's a very different story. These changes that I see here in the forest, the paths that get overgrown so quickly, the lyrebirds, as Sudama and I were talking about yesterday, who have no respect for gardening, no respect for order, who are just pure agents of chaos and will do their best to destroy what you create. And I spoke yesterday about rebuilding a retaining wall down at Waterfall Kuti, which was very promptly destroyed the very next day by those naughty lyrebirds. And it's not only the lyrebirds, but the wind, the rain, the fires that create a lot of change here, and of course just the growth of nature around us, the way things want to occupy a space like the monastery. We're here in the forest. Forest wants to compost us, wants to reassert its control. And I think that's why the Buddha really recommended going to these kind of wilderness places, because in many ways there is a great letting go of control that we have to do when we come to the forest. So much letting go. Living in a kuti is like camping. You just have to do things in a completely different way. You can't expect, the luxuries of city life, and that's why the Buddha said, go to the forest. You're confronted with the rather base reality of your human existence. It's messy. Every single action you do leaves a trace. You can't urinate, you can't defecate, you can't even walk without leaving a trace here. And there's that reminder within us of, that we are just animals too in many ways, that we are poorly adapted animals here in this forest. And then when I look up at the stars at night and I see the brightness of the stars and I see the silvery light of the moon, I get this beautiful appreciation of the forest. But I know that just over that ridge perhaps there's some danger. I could trip, I could fall, I could hurt myself, there could be a snake. And so when I come to the forest, these are the kinds of things that I think about. And I really see that change, and I really see, I guess, what you could describe, almost like a not self, like I'm so reliant upon so many things. It's so foolish for me to perceive that my existence here is somehow unique or special. I'm here purely dependent upon, the water to survive, the hut which I live in has been constructed by so many people, maintained by so many people, so that I can enjoy it here momentarily. I see that, when I look up at the stars, that I'm just this small, pathetic creature, and this is suffering. What I'm talking about here. There's so much suffering to be seen in being here in the forest, being a human, seeing the dangers of my life, the fragility of it all, and then seeing the layers I add to it myself, the ego that I bring to being here in the forest, being here in the monastery, thinking, if we should do this thing this way, then things will be improved and things will be much better. If we could only just put that log there to stop that water coming here, then we'll prevent that erosion under the kuti. If I move that rock there and use it as a step, how many times have we rebuilt the steps to bridge kuti? So many times. And still change comes and tells us, you are not in charge. And this is confronting. It's confronting for us. We go about our life here in this monastery, carving out a utopian vision of the forest, life in the forest, where we have some sort of perception of control of things. That if we can just have our systems or our methods or our this or our that, or do this or do that, then somehow we can prevent change from coming and bothering us with its newness, its novelty, its difference. And of course this is just an illusion that we've created to sustain a version of ourselves. And when that version of ourselves is challenged, it's uncomfortable, it's distressing. When I realize I can't climb up the rocks to Bridge Kuti as fast as I used to, I'm out of shape, I'm out of condition, I can't lift those rocks like I used to, I'm losing strength, I'm getting older. This is what I need to be aware of being here. The work, the form isn't important. What I need to understand is the truth of my nature here in this place. And this is what monasteries are for, after all. We're not here to, create the perfect deck. We're not here to build the best steps to Bridge Kuti or whatever. We're not here to do those things. We're here because we need to look very deeply at the nature of reality and to understand for ourselves what the Buddha taught. That is our job. That is the purpose of a monastery. And it's so easy to lose that perspective so quickly, especially we become overburdened by work and duties. We start to take on more and more and more things. And our spiritual practice, as a result, kind of recedes. We start to build ourselves a utopian version. Just as we carve out this land from the forest, we also try to carve out a version of our spiritual practice which we like, which is comfortable and easy, which doesn't challenge us too much. And it's very easy to not look more deeply and to ask those really hard questions like, what am I doing here? What is the purpose of me being here? How am I using the time that I have to practice? And so being in the forest is such a special experience, it's such a unique experience, especially here in the West, such a fortunate opportunity. And the lessons of the forest are so many. Every day the ants are crawling across me as if I'm already dead. I wake up covered in ants and I'm like, here I am, the corpse, ready to go. I walk outside, the deck that I swept is already covered in leaves. I go down the steps. These are steps, once again, that have been put there anew to replace the ones that I put there with Joe many years ago and the ones that were put there before. Walk down the narrow, ever narrowing path which Sudama just a few months ago widened, and come up to the top of the monastery and see the sun rising. And I'm aware of these great forces of change. I'm aware of just how impermanent things are. And I'm aware of my pathetic ego. It means nothing to this forest. It means nothing to those stars that I'm here. It doesn't matter how well I paint the deck. This is just stuff. This is just things that we do. Things that we do to kind of cover up, to paint over that thin, papery feeling of insubstantiality, that uncertainty, that doubt of self. And so on my travels, I've been very fortunate to encounter all these different ways of doing things, and that change has been really helpful for me to to feel like a monk who, in many times, has no idea what's going on. Go to this ritual, we're doing this, we start with this chanting, we end with that chanting, we chant all these verses I never heard before. And there's something wonderful about not knowing, not being the one who knows, being fresh and new, and hearing something for the first time, thinking about something for the first time. Oh, why are they doing that now? And this is something that we lose over time with our spiritual practice. Downstairs just before we were talking about some of the chanting, and I said, sometimes I ask some of the monks, I was like, do you know who wrote this, where this came from? And they had no interest in asking that question before. They had no interest in knowing. And I like that inquiry of asking, why are we doing this? What is this for? What is the purpose? And it's something that you can only really do when you don't know, when it's new, when it's something that you're only just experiencing for the first time as a beginner. Because the process of institutionalization soon takes over and you become inured to these things, and they're just the things you do. This is just how it is. And then pretty soon you've submitted, and then you're teaching the next person, this is how it is here, this is how we do things, and that's how it continues like that. And so I guess this is why the Buddha, when he taught, he really asked people to look into the nature of things. And when he set up things like the Vinaya, he didn't tell each and every circumstance, do this, do that. He gave a lot of confidence, I suppose, in people's ability to make these sort of judgments. But one of the things that I thought I would refer to briefly tonight was when I said before, should we do some meditation? And Sudama says, whatever. And of course this is the perfect Buddhist response. And this is what we find in places like the Chulagosinga Sutta, where the Venerables say that they put aside their own ideas and just go along with whatever that other Venerable wants. Whatever those Venerable wants to do. We give up our views, we give up our desires, our me, my way, my chanting, my this, my that. And we just go along with what they want to do. And this is one of the principles of cordiality or social harmony that the Buddha outlined. We have these beautiful thoughts of loving kindness towards each other in public and private, beautiful mental thoughts, beautiful bodily thoughts in public and private, beautiful speech in public and private. We share whatever we have, we share the contents of our bowls, we share the same ethics, we practice the same. We try to keep the precepts in the same way so that everyone is practicing together harmoniously. And then we have right view. We share right understanding. And this is perhaps one of the most important things that we share as monastics, that we have an understanding of the Four Noble Truths as the Buddha described them. Even if it's just a small understanding, we have at least something to guide us. And so that when it comes here to the monastery, to being here, to living together, to looking at the forest, which is ever changing and always trying to destroy us, we have an understanding about suffering, where it comes from. And we're here because we understand that there is the possibility for that cessation of suffering, and that we are walking that path. And it's that path that is most important, not the path on the decking, not the path down to Waterfall Kuti or anything like that. Like that path is the most important part. And sometimes as monastics, we get so caught up in work or in busyness or activities, we forget that path. Which is why I feel so fortunate that I've been able to do so much travel, because in all these places I've visited, doing all of these different chanting, all of these different morning activities, all of these different things, I'm always just a visitor. And I've never had to take on that responsibility. And I've seen what it does to our leaders. It becomes a burden. It becomes something that occupies much more of our time than the other parts of our practice. And so we neglect our spiritual practice for more worldly activities at times. And that may change for me in the future, of course, but I feel as if there's a great freedom. I know Ajahn Brahm talks about going to Bodhinyana and stepping out on Mondays and not being an owner, not being responsible, not having that burden. And I think that that's an important way to live in a monastery, because, as I said, there's no owner here. I've seen them all come and go. I've seen the ones who were certain they'd be here forever, and they've all gone. There's so little certainty in this place. The only certainty is that we're not going to be here forever. The forest is going to outlive us. That tree is going to keep growing long after we're dead. And so again, we have to remind ourselves of the importance of why we're here. What brought us to the forest? What do we want to get out of our time being here? And so we really need to inquire very deep within to find these answers. And one of the ways that we can do that is to remember that we are not that important, that our work is not that important, that the things that matter most is our potential to achieve Nibbana in this life, and that is where we should put our focus. And I say this to you as much as I say it to myself. But this is why we come to the forest. This is why we're living this spiritual life. And it's so easy for it to become obscured. It's so easy for our spiritual practice to become confusing, like all of these different styles of chanting or different styles of bowing or this ritual or that ritual. It's so easy for our spiritual life to become confused, and we lose that certainty that we need to feel like we're able to make progress in a deep and meaningful way. And so when I've been going to all of these places, learning about this Buddhist culture or that Buddhist culture, I see how easy it is to lose that focus, and how some of the forms overtake the intention towards enlightenment, how we have to do things like this, and then we have to do this thing, or we have to do that thing. And very soon the things that we're doing seem so meaningless and so devoid of depth. And the monastic life can become equally meaningless and lacking in depth. And I've seen so many monastics who, if they had had more opportunity in a different culture, might have been able to really flourish, but because they're in a certain place, in a certain time, their practice is very weak and feeble. And so even when there's the perfect monasteries, I stayed in several perfect monasteries when I was overseas, the form of those monasteries doesn't equal spiritual practice, depth, knowledge, wisdom. Just having a nice monastery, a beautiful monastery, isn't depth of wisdom and knowledge. It's just like a house of cards that you build, stays for some time and then it falls over. And it's the same with Santi. It won't be here forever. It wasn't always here. It's changed a lot. Who knows what the future will bring. But we have an obligation to ourselves to make sure that however we spend our time here, it's focusing more and more in line with the Buddha's teachings, understanding them more and more in an experiential way, and penetrating them in a deep way. And this is only possible when we work our heart out, when we really make this work our priority. And so that's why I talk to you about this today. I get caught up in my own stuff so much. I neglect my own practice. I come to the forest to restore that practice, and maybe from time to time, even in the forest, it's easy to neglect our practice. And so I don't know how things are going for the community members here, but all I know is that I feel like I'm inspired to be here in the forest, seeing it afresh. I feel like my practice is inspired also. And so I'm giving this talk in the hope that it might also inspire you. Sadhu, 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 anumo.